Hello, Women of Welcome. I'm Sarah Casada, and I'm excited to jump in today to our conversation around Dreamers, DACA, and the DREAM Act. So every now and then we see these words pop up in the news, and we're about to see them quite a bit more this spring and early summer as we're waiting for a decision from the Supreme Court about the status of DACA. So to help us navigate the news and kind of walk through what's happening as we see stories being shared and this court case being discussed, I wanted to help us define terms, get a little bit of history and context about what exactly is happening. So to do that, I'm going to take us back in time to 2001, which is when Congress looked at a piece of legislation called the DREAM Act. And DREAM stands for the Development, Relief, and Education of Alien Minors. And so this was a piece of legislation that went before Congress. It had strong bipartisan support. It had strong public support, and it did not pass. This legislation was addressing a population of immigrant children who had been brought to the U.S. while they were minors. And it was a recognition that there were folks in this community who had lived their entire lives in the U.S. who spoke English almost as a first language, if they spoke another language at all. And so this was an opportunity for Congress to pass legislation to provide them a pathway to adjusting their status. After it did not pass, we have seen variations of this same DREAM Act pop in and out of Congress since 2001, which is a very long time, and it's especially long if you are someone who is waiting to hear from this legislation the next steps for your professional and personal life. So after the DREAM Act, people who would have qualified for it, that's how we started using the term dreamers. It comes from this piece of legislation. And so what happened was 2001, again, long time ago, and as it has not passed since then. In fact, the most recent iteration of the DREAM Act came before Congress in 2017. So this has been a long history of this piece of legislation, or variations thereof. In 2012, however, because this legislation had not passed, despite bipartisan support and public support, President Obama issued an executive order establishing DACA, which stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And so, of course, the word deferred means pushed back, postponed. So this was essentially an executive order that protected dreamers while we were waiting for Congress to come up with a legislative solution. And so let me tell you who qualified for DACA. You had to have been born after June of 1981. You had to have arrived before the age of 16, and you had to have lived in the U.S. since June of 2007. So there's a lot of numbers, but in reality, there were parameters around who qualified for this protection. Now, I just want to make one note, because a lot of times when I think of dreamers, I'm thinking of teenagers or young adults. I'm 1 month shy of being the oldest person able to qualify for this legislation. So I think it's important to realize that in 2001, I was 2 years out of high school, and so these were young people who were looking for opportunities to go to college, to work, to figure out their next steps after graduating school. But because it's been so long with no legislation passed, we're not necessarily only talking about young people anymore. We're talking about professionals. We're talking about moms and dads and homeowners and students and all of these things. And so I just want to kind of be clear about that as we talk about this population of dreamers. So when Obama had the executive order for DACA, what DACA did was protect dreamers from deportation. That was its main purpose. And it also allowed them access to driver's license and a work permit and the ability to go to school. What it did not allow was access to any federal scholarships or aid money for school, and it did not provide any pathway to permanent residence. So there was no way that dreamers could, through DACA, become legal permanent residents. That's not what the executive order did. It simply said, we're not going to deport you until we figure this out, and you can work in the meantime. But that was in 2012. And like I said, still in 2017, we weren't able to pass any kind of DREAM Act. So, and again, I just want to point out there's these parameters around who qualifies. And so this is a narrow solution for a specific group of people, about 800,000 people. So it's no small impact. Like, there are a lot of people affected by the DREAM Act. But I do just want to clarify that there are people who have very similar stories, were brought here as children, have grown up in the U.S., but may have come 1 month before the cutoff for this. So I just want to be clear about that. So where are we now? Essentially, President Trump canceled DACA, which was Obama's executive order. And so that has been going through the court system over the last few months. And about 4 months ago, the Supreme Court heard arguments about DACA. Can the president cancel it? And so we're waiting to hear. In late spring, in like May, early June, we expect to hear a response from the Supreme Court. If they do decide to cancel it, potentially Dreamers will be available to be deported. I don't think that's the right way to say it, but they'll be eligible for deportation. That's the word I'm looking for, eligible. And if they don't cancel it, there's still an issue because we still need a permanent solution from Congress. So DACA has always been meant to be a temporary measure. And so if we cancel it, there will be immediate challenges for those families. And if we don't cancel it, there won't be immediate challenges, but there still is a challenge. So I want to be clear that this doesn't create a permanent solution for Dreamers. It never has. So some things we can do while we wait. It's always important to keep calling our representatives, emailing them, tweeting them, whatever your favorite medium of communication is, and letting them know that we want a permanent solution for Dreamers. There's always been strong public support for this. There's always been strong bipartisan support for this. It's something that we should encourage Congress to fulfill. And then in the meantime, as we wait for this decision from Congress, it's also good to share stories of Dreamers with people in our lives who may not know the background or exactly what's happening. It's good to share with them resources that help them understand DACA and the DREAM Act as well. And so, so that is just a little update on what's happening there. We have this in one of our FAQ videos, so if you're new to this community, you can feel free to watch those videos to get this kind of information about lots of different topics. But with this coming up shortly, I wanted to make sure that we were talking about it because it's a really important piece of legislation, court case that we're watching, and eager to see what the next steps are and how we can support Dreamers in our community. All right. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to put them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer, and thanks for watching.